Mounted on lumbering wooden carriages, they were hampered with cumbersome harness of breechin and strong side tackles for running them out. Guns and carriages, together with the long rammers and shorter lintstocks lodged in loops overhead, all these, as customary, were painted black. And the heavy hempen breechins, tarred to the same tint, wore the like livery of the undertakers. In contrast with the funereal hue of these surroundings, the prone sailor's exterior apparel, white jumper and white duck trousers, each more or less soiled, dimly glimmered in the obscure light of the bay like a patch of discolored snow in early April, lingering at some upland cave's black mouth. It should have a little
that would be more like mid-range only.
Come gather around while we tell the story of Billy Bird, fur-capped man, handsome sailor.
And his captain, Starry Veer.
Named so after his very erudite brother-in-law. Yeah.
Like that moment, you like Melville's fabulousness really comes through in that moment where you're like, ooh, just couldn't hold back from Starry Veer, could you?
Melville would be the dude at the party I want to hang out with. He is.
Yep. Can you imagine this book landing in the era of Gertrude Stein and Fitzgerald and Hemingway?
I can, because it feels like it. I feel like he's actually kind of to me the themes are actually anticipating the moderns and existentialism, and particularly sort of the horrors of war, the expediency of the society versus the needs of the individual, God's law versus man's law, all of these big questions that were on everybody's mind in the 1920s, because we just had a giant war where we used factories to kill people, not literally, but they built. That was later, but we built tanks in factories.
Giant factories rolling across Flanders, eating Germans.
It was an industrial war. No, I mean I'm not joking. I mean
no. I'm continuing with the industrial thing.
Yeah, but it's not. I don't know if you saw that. What was that movie by Guillermo del Toro where cities are giant mobile tanks from a few years ago?
No, I mean it sounds like he took Pacific Rim to the next level, kind of.
Yeah. Anyway, we don't have to go there. So Billy Budd is a handsome sailor.
He sure is.
He apparently this is like an archetype. It's set in 1897, which is significant because the British are at war with the French. They're desperate for sailors, and they've had a couple of mutinies that year that has made them they're really on edge about the old mutiny thing. Billy Budd is an American sailor. He's on an American merchantman, and pretty much the first thing that happens is that he is impressed into service off his merchantman, the Rights of Man, and onto
I know,
the frigate.
That detail. Amazing.
The frigate, is it a little bit symbolic? He is impressed into the British frigate Indomitable, which basically means kidnapped legally. And by the way, this is actually one of the things that led to the War of 1812. The Americans were like, stop doing that to our sailors. And the British were like, no, make us. So the captain of the Indomitable is Starry Veer, something like Lord Fairfax Veer.
Like Edward Fairfax Starry Veer, in something amazing.
Starry Veer is his brother-in-law or somebody like that named him that after or another captain named him that after a favorite poem. The other major character is John Claggart, the Master of Arms, who's kind of like the MP, like the military police chief, a petty officer. And there's also a character named...
is he petty.
He is petty. Billy Budd doesn't complain, really, about being impressed in the service. He learns his duty. He's a foretopman, which is about the hardest, most athletic job on a sailing ship, because you got to go up into the forward mast, way up high during storms when there's 40 or 50 feet of play, and furl the sails. So he is young, he's athletic, he's handsome, he's well-liked, he's innocent, but Claggart does not like him. We don't really know why. Our narrator is interesting because the narrator sees much, but not all. He is a non-omniscient narrator. So our narrator has a few guesses, thinks that Claggart is perhaps envious of Billy's handsomeness and popularity. Claggart contrives to entrap Billy, basically setting him up to get in trouble for organizing a mutiny. This doesn't work, so Claggart just goes to the captain and says falsely that he has evidence that Billy is a mutineer, leading a plot. And the captain says, well, I don't think so. Billy Budd seems like a nice guy, but let's talk to him about it. So they bring him in. Claggart lays out the charges, and Billy has a stutter, and he is so incensed that he can't respond. The captain says, now, boy, defend yourself. We're listening. And he just can't get the words out, so he strikes Claggart and knocks him down in one blow, and he dies. We've learned already that Billy Budd is very strong and perhaps doesn't even know his own strength.
He's very handy in a fight and quick to address an injustice.
He's got a speech impediment, and so part of what happens is that he's enraged, but he can't talk. So this is highly illegal, murdering an officer. So Veer convenes a drumhead trial. He says, well, look, I was the witness, so I can't be the judge. So he brings his officers in, tells them what happens. Billy Budd confesses to the murder, but says, I didn't mean to kill him, and I'm not trying to do a mutiny. The officers believe him, and they think that he is innocent and that it was an accident and that he was not intending to kill Claggart. And in fact, that there was even some justification because they believe that he was falsely accused. And one of the officers, I put one quote in this summary, but surely Budd proposed neither mutiny nor homicide, one of the officers says, and Veer responds, surely not, my good man. And before a court less arbitrary and more merciful than a martial one, that plea would largely extenuate. But we proceed under the law of the Mutiny Act. In feature, no child can resemble his father more than that act resembles, in spirit, the thing from which it derives, war. Meaning, we're at war, the rules are the rules, and if we let people get away with mutiny, we're going to have chaos on our hands, and so that they have to respect the law. And Billy is convicted and sentenced to death. It is the evening, and so he's going to be hung in the morning. The captain visits him in his cabin and spends some time there. Again, we're shut out. We don't know what happens in this moment. The next morning, he is hung before the crew. His last words are, God bless Captain Veer. And then there are a couple of sort of epilogic chapters that suggests that everybody's kind of having a hard time making sense of there's a couple of what just happened chapters. And one of the most compelling details is that Captain Veer never really seems to get over this incident. And in fact, a few years later, when he's killed in action, his last words are Billy Budd, Billy Budd. And the end.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a simple plot.
Simple story.
My Lord, still waters run deep. This is I was so floored by this book, and I can't wait. I like, it's one of those books where the concept of where to start is quite difficult because I feel like there's too much brilliance to try to grab a hold of. For so few total words, it really hits on just an absolute wild number of themes of the human condition. It's interesting to talk about Melville's economy, because that's not usually what we talk about when we talk about Melville. But I've got a question for you about architecture that we'll get to in a little bit.
Sure.
But yeah, I think you've got a question to get us going.
I will agree with you that I was like, I should find a reading, and there were at least 7. But really, you could just open the book at random, put your finger down and read. I've said this before about Melville. His prose, every paragraph is like a poem. I mean, he has such a facility with language and so many different tools at his command. I think he's a genius. I don't know that there is a more raw, talented American writer ever in terms of just pure sentences. I mean, it reminds me of Jennifer Egan, F. Scott Fitzgerald. Anyway, though, but leaving all that aside, I want to do a classic Bag Dukes role play. Maybe this is becoming a theme because we've done a version of this before. Okay, we're going to do alternative history. Moby Dick has never been published. Herman Melville is unknown. And through bizarre means, he has time traveled to the future. And you're his literary agent. And he presents you with this manuscript. And you read it, and you're like, this is great.
Yeah.
I am your favorite publisher, editor at a house that you have a good relationship with. Pitch me this book. Why should I publish this book?
Okay. Jesse, I've got this author, and I don't know where he came from. The way he dresses is insane. I sort of feel like he's like playing a bit of a role.
Interesting. So maybe he would be good on Instagram, like self-promoter. Do you think he'd be a good Instagram?
I think so. He'd be a great influencer. Yeah. Yes, absolutely. Top drawer. The way he speaks, like if he is doing a bit, he is incredibly committed to it. Okay, this book, it's a very simple book, and it might not, at first blush, like really appeal to like the page turning beach going crowd.
Well, just give me the one sentence version. What are we? What happens?
Okay. The one sentence version of this book is: the world is unfair and sublime.
Oh, that's interesting. Well, okay. Okay, I think there's promise there. People are always interested in unfairness. What's the plot, though? I mean, is this a romance story? Is it an adventure story? Is it, modern novel about affairs? What are we doing?
It's all of those things. It's a love triangle, which is always great, always interesting. There is quite a bit of sort of closeted behavior and projection from one of the characters onto our hero, who is beautiful, who is a very attractive young man.
So sex? Is there any sex?
It comes right up to the edge of sex.
Yeah.
But the thing is the writing is so good that you can really actually, you can interpolate sensuality. Like, there isn't overt sex in this book, but reading it at times, there are moments when the sensuality takes over so much that you're like, oh, there is some hot action going on in the HMS Indomitable. Oh, it takes place on a British British ship. Oh. So we can totally capture the Bridgerton crowd. That is going to be available to us as well.
Oh, that's good. Yeah. That's like Patrick O'Brien. Are there like gun battles, engagements, action and adventure, swashbuckling?
There's one short chase that is not consummated, but in the end, there is a battle. But one of our main characters is killed somewhat heroically.
A mystery.
Yes.
A mystery. We don't know who kills him, and our protagonist has to track down, and it's suspenseful.
He's killed by a French musket ball. So we know exactly who killed him, but we do get the sense that he has never quite gotten over the action of this book, the action of the plot, and that he is racked with guilt. And in fact, our three principal corners of the love triangle all die. One justly, one very unjustly, and then I really think the last one of a broken heart and a sense of dereliction of duty. It manages to somehow be both postmodern and kind of like an 18th century Gothic novel at the same time.
I have to say that you've done a fabulous job, like making Billy Budd sound appealing to a contemporary publisher in a way that I think once they read it, they would be like, liar!
I don't think so. And maybe this goes to your question about immersion.
Yeah.
It's a really slow burn to get going. And you spend a little while hacking through the prose isn't Baroque, but it is it's convoluted. You have to really be up with your litotes, like the number of times that there's something like, in as much as it wasn't uninhabitable for
there are a lot of clauses.
Many clauses.
You got to really pay attention to what the subject is, what the object is, whether you're in the midst of an interjection or not. Usually there'll be some literary allusions thrown in. But that's interesting because I think part of what you're saying is that you actually feel like this would. my premise in asking you to do that was I didn't think this novella would appeal to a modern publisher because of its simplicity and because of its lack of sex, much violence. I mean, someone's killed, yes, but in probably the most boring way ever. Like, he gets hit and he falls down and he's dead. There's no suspense. We know who did it. The entire third of the book is basically just the captain talking to the officers about law and philosophy. There's no sex. There's tension. You could read it as sexual tension. I actually don't read it as sexual tension, but you certainly could. But to me, it seems like what they would be looking for if you were to would be like, oh yeah, the Claggart is sleeping with Billy Budd, and then Billy Budd starts sleeping with somebody else, and he's falls into a range and he kills him, but nobody knows who did the killing, and then the captain has to turn into a detective, or then Billy Budd runs for it and there's a chase, and settles on an island of gay sailors who are mutineers, and
he moves to Provincetown. Instead of Nantucket. He misses Nantucket and ends up in Provincetown.
It doesn't. To me, it seems like nowadays you sort of need more kind of variations on a theme. And this it's such a simple plot.
But something thrums underneath the surface of this novel that is undeniable. Like if we're gonna, the reason I think this would hit so hard in Hemingway's era is this is exactly what Hemingway was talking about when he was talking about the iceberg principle.
I agree.
There is this massive gravitas that is the ballast of this novel that we never actually see, but it informs everything that happens. It informs our emotional response to the book, and it is huge. It is no smaller than the purpose of man and his God on this planet.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, go for it.
And you see it as Claggart's semi-mysterious envy of Billy Budd, or do you locate it elsewhere?
I located in so many places. Yes, yeah. In Claggart's unexplained hatred of Billy Budd, which I think Melville does the genius turn of not explicating. Right. It's we don't get to see Grendel. We can make all sorts of suppositions about where the hatred is coming from. Is it projection? Is it jealousy? Is it love?
Our narrator speculates, but even he says, I don't know, but I think it's maybe envy, but even that is sort of mysterious. And there's this long sort of digression about, I forget the term he used, but natural depravity too. Some people are just like that.
Yeah, I mean, this book also trades in nature and nurture, what's at stake there. I also located in Billy's, Billy is the perfect blank. He is a beautiful, naive, innocent, non-informant. If he just told about the mutineer who came to him and offered him 2 guineas, the jig would be up. Yep. And he wouldn't have to get hanged. But Billy's moral standing comes from somewhere massive. It could be God. It could be something else. We know that Melville worked. I mean, there's so many themes of religion, but we also know that Melville was also skeptical of religion, and so. And then the captain, the captain's inability to get over it, which actually I think ends up killing him. It's sort of slightly suggested that maybe he's kind of off his game in that engagement. Yep. And he lingers, but eventually doesn't make it. And I mean, of course, anytime we're set on the sea, the sublime is always there, because, it's the literal transposition of the iceberg idea, except in this case, it's a ship full of men sailing over the inchoate deep. And I mean, this was my question to you about architecture is it is a slow burn to get started. I struggled with immersion too. Are there any details in those first like 6 or 7 chapters that don't pay off?
I don't think so. I mean, there's this bizarre... I mean, I actually immersed pretty quickly. You know, like I would say by the end of chapter 1, I was all in, and even a little bit sooner. But you would think, and also having read Moby Dick, there is a chapter that is sort of something to the effect of like, before we continue with our story, let's pause and reflect on the greatest sailor to have ever lived, Admiral Lord Nelson. And then there's, I don't know, 6 or 7 pages about Admiral Nelson, this and that, the other thing. But I think that all pays off because, you know, you talk about where Billy Budd's goodness and innocence comes from. And I think that Nelson is set up as a kind of foil for all 3 major characters. Veer resembles him in some respects in that he is dutiful, in that, you know, I think that Veer he's a bit of a fussy, nerdy, soft-hearted captain, but nobody has anything bad to say about his seamanship and about his bravery. So he's sort of like how like maybe you and I and Melville would imagine ourselves to be if we were in that job, which is like kind of nerdy, soft-hearted, but like good at it. And then Claggart, you know, really fails. He is the opposite of Nelson. You know, he is cowardly. He is conniving. He is different outward than inward. And Billy Budd is imbued with that quality that Nelson had sufficiently. And then the great irony is, just like Nelson, the institution of the British Navy in this case, Billy Budd is exactly what they want, and the institution is such that he is too good for it. That the needs of the institution are, due to these circumstances, set up in such a way that it cannot handle the situation where somebody is so good but has broken a rule, and then must needs be destroyed. And yeah, I think that entire first section sets that all up beautifully. I also think the first chapter is kind of funny. One of the bookmarks I made is the captain of the merchantman, after Billy Budd has been impressed, is invited onto the Indomitable. It's sort of like, yeah, I took your best sailor, so I got to do something nice. So, like, come on board, let's talk, and let's have a little bit of drink. And we get this wonderful observation. In fact, he was one of those sea dogs in whom all the hardship and peril of naval life and the great prolonged wars of his time never impaired the natural instinct for sensuous enjoyment. His duty he always faithfully did, but duty is sometimes a dry obligation, and he was for irrigating its aridity, whensoever possible, with a fertilizing decoction of strong waters. I mean, like, Melville's like, yeah, I gotta drag you through some preliminaries, but it's gonna be fun. Like,
it's gonna be fun. Yeah,
it's gonna be fun.
That sentence, good Lord. Like, he is such a... I mean, like, it's really good that I'm pitching this book. I should not edit this book.
Yeah.
Like, I would be too much like, leave it all in, you know? Like, oh, Melville's got another 100 pages of this before he died. Sweet, let's add that too. Let's get more words in here.
Yeah, the only place I think the editors went wrong is that he didn't finish it in his lifetime, and I think he made like sort of 3 attempts at an ending chapter, and they're like, I don't know, let's put them all in. And you get this weird digression about like what's to be made of the lack of spasmodic twitching that I don't think we really need. But other than that, I wouldn't take that stuff out. I mean, it is sort of the opposite of Hemingway. Like, Hemingway would be like, the captain was a man who liked to drink, you know? And,
right. Yeah, exactly.
And that's his
totally.
version of the iceberg, you know. Like, I mean, his version of the iceberg is, I'm going to say it very bluntly, but then given the way the characters relate to this truth, you're going to sense a lot more. Brett was damn fine looking, he says at one point in The Sun Also Rises. And then it's like, yeah, that's actually that is actually the lodestone, that the action of this entire novel is going to be in orbit of that particular sentence. It's much more than Brett is damn fine looking, but that's how he's going to put it. Whereas Melville's version of it is talking about the handsome sailor and how this young man could pose naked for a statue of Adonis, or he doesn't say the captain appreciated a drink. He says his duty he always faithfully did, but duty is sometimes a dry obligation, and he was for irrigating its aridity whensoever possible with a fertilizing decoction of strong waters, which is equally like obfuscatory, right? Because you got in a way you have to be like, I see what he's saying. It's not. It's so high in the language, and there's so much verbiage that you actually have to kind of pleasurably translate it a little bit as you read it. And it's amusing.
Yeah, it's funny. It's the you're right. It's the opposite of the Hemingway approach, but they both work. And they're both incredibly entertaining. Like, it's just like, once I, it took me a little while. I think I was probably like not in the correct. I was trying to read it before I went to bed, and I was like, oh my God, I'm tired. There's a lot of words. And then gave it more time the next day, and then listened to some of it. And the version that I have listened is very, very well read. And then just found myself being like, what is this? Like, this is absolutely amazing. It really feels modern. It feels postmodern. It feels contemporary. It feels like it could fit in the 19th century. It feels like it could fit in the 18th century. Like,
it feels like relevant today. Like it.
It's amazing. Like, I was so floored by this. It really it both like deepens and enhances Beau Travail, which is really amazing because it's already incredible, but it makes me even more excited to watch Beau Travail after this,
which is an interesting variation that makes some decisions that this book does not, in interesting ways too. And that's the film we're going to watch next, that was inspired loosely by this novel, thematically and structurally, although it's not one-to-one exactly.
Totally. Let's see. We both have readings. Do you want to you want to go first? Mine is a little long. It's probably going to take a little while because I couldn't find a place to cut, basically.
Sure. Let me see. I think, yes, I'll do my reading. No, you know what? I kind of snuck a couple of readings. Well, here's what I'll do. I'll do an early one because I think yours comes later. This is just characterization of Billy Budd sort of early on, and it proves incredibly important, even though, like much of Melville's writing, you can't tell, like, is this plot or is this just like the speaker or the author kind of musing on something or another. Though our handsome sailor had as much of masculine beauty as one can expect anywhere to see, nevertheless, like the beautiful woman in one of Hawthorne's minor tales, there was just one thing amiss in him. No visible blemish, indeed, as with the lady. No, but an occasional liability to a vocal defect. Though in the hour of elemental uproar or peril he was everything that a sailor should be, yet under sudden provocation of strong heart-feeling, his voice, otherwise singularly musical, as if expressive of the harmony within, was apt to develop an organic hesitancy. In fact, more or less of a stutter. Or even worse. In this particular, Billy was a striking instance that the arch interferer, the envious marplot of Eden, still has more or less to do with every human consignment to this planet of Earth. In every case, one way or another, he is sure to slip in his little card, as much as if to remind us, I too have a hand here.
See, like, this is what this book does. It begins in a physical description of a nice-looking young man, and at the end of it, you're suddenly realizing that there's evil everywhere, and you must look out for it in all of its guises whenever it comes for you.
Yes, it is Melville's version of Randy Waterhouse observing that the ants are eating other ants everywhere around in the jungle. Yeah, indeed.
Yeah, and that's one of those architecture moments when at first you're like, what is this doing here?
Yeah.
And then you're like, oh my God, his tragic flaw is that he has a stutter?
Yeah. Indeed. Also, reading it, I got a real echo. This phrase, with every human consignment to this planet of Earth, with every person, a real echo of the speech that Scrooge's nephew gives to Scrooge when he tries to wish him Merry Christmas. And Scrooge is being Scrooge-like about that. And the nephew says something like, it's one of the few days when we're all reminded that we're all fellow travelers to the grave. There's a similar bigness to this. And I'm sure Melville read and appreciated Dickens too, because who wouldn't?
Of course. Yeah, right. I mean, they're peas in a pod, except that Melville somehow gets farther along the lines to...
This is existentialism.
Yeah, existentialism and this sort of like ineluctable, like, what is happening here?
Yeah.
Which I think is which I find just so just enjoyable in this book. And I was reminded of the dimensional folding from when they were making the Sophons in Three Body.
Yeah.
Melville's sentences are like 12 dimensions that can like fold up into small spaces, but then ramify into these gigantic, like epic kind of like ejaculations of meaning.
Which is also a verb he uses often in the novel.
Of course he does. Yes. Yeah. He's like, I mean, there's definitely the narrator's tone of voice is, oh, there could be some hot action going on the HMS Indomitable if only I were there.
You certainly can read it that way. Yeah, you certainly can read it that way. I also think you could read it without any homoerotic quality, although I would say where maybe you see the most of that is Claggart's Envy. Does really savor, another Melville word, it does really savor of kind of sexual jealousy and frustration. I love the detail about the unfolding. I absolutely agree with that. That was 3 sentences, by the way, all unfolded into like the sophonic 7th dimension.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. This book, it just keeps unfolding. It's like a house of cards that continues falling apart forever.
Yeah.
Which you're just like, is this impossibility? And yet he does it.
And the narrator, like in this graph I just read you is a good example of this. The narrator is often kind of thinking out loud, right? Like when he's thinking about the stutter, he doesn't say, oh, he had a stutter. He says, his voice, otherwise singularly musical, as if expressive of the harmony within, was apt to develop an organic hesitancy. In fact, more or less of a stutter. Or even worse. Like he's escalating his observation right in front of us. Which is quite the trick. And it feels very realistic to me. Like I'm imagining this as a 45-year-old sailor remembering something that happened 20 years ago. Maybe he was one of the officers on the ship or another sailor or something like that. He seems familiar with the story, but not entirely familiar. And it's also a bit mysterious to him as well. And part of why I think the book works so well is that our narrator doesn't quite understand what's going on.
Yeah, we're in the same boat as the narrator.
Yeah.
We're given to see glimpses of yeah, exactly. Right. Yeah. I want to read, this is after Billy has been basically sentenced to die.
Yeah.
And he's spending the night on the upper gun deck. And this might go on for a few minutes because, I read about half a page of this earlier out loud and it took me like close to 90 seconds, I think.
I'm here for it.
But I cannot remember when I read a passage of words so fucking gorgeous and also like so evocative and full of so much meaning and so much illusion that I'd read it so many times and listened to it a bunch of times. On the starboard side of the Indomitable's upper gun deck, behold Billy Budd under sentry, lying prone in chains, in one of the bays formed by the regular spacing of the guns composing the batteries on either side. All of these pieces were of the heavier caliber of that period, Mounted on lumbering wooden carriages, they were hampered with cumbersome harness of breechin and strong side tackles for running them out. Guns and carriages, together with the long rammers and shorter lintstocks lodged in loops overhead, all these, as customary, were painted black. And the heavy hempen breechins, tarred to the same tint, wore the like livery of the undertakers. In contrast with the funereal hue of these surroundings, the prone sailor's exterior apparel, white jumper and white duck trousers, each more or less soiled, dimly glimmered in the obscure light of the bay like a patch of discolored snow in early April lingering at some upland cave's black mouth. In effect, he's already in his shroud, or the garments that shall serve him in lieu of one. Over him, but scarce illuminating him, 2 battle lanterns swing from 2 massive beams of the deck above, fed with the oil supplied by the war contractors, whose gains, honest or otherwise, are in every land an anticipated portion of the harvest of death. With flickering splashes of dirty yellow light, they pollute the pale moonshine, all but ineffectually struggling in obscured flecks through the open ports from which the tompaned cannons protrude. Other lanterns at intervals serve but to bring out the somewhat obscurer bays which, like small confessionals or side chapels in a cathedral, branch from the long, dim-vistaed broad aisle between the 2 batteries of that covered tier. Such was the deck, where now lay the handsome sailor. Through the rose tan of his complexion no pallor could have shone. It would have taken days of sequestration from the winds and the sun to have brought about the effacement of that. But the skeleton in the cheekbone, at the point of its angle, was just beginning delicately to be defined under warm-tinted skin. In fervid hearts self-contained, some experiences devour our human tissue as secret fire in the ship's hold consumes cotton in the bale. But now, lying between the 2 guns, as nipped in the vice of fate, Billy's agony, mainly proceeding from a generous young heart's virgin experience of the diabolical incarnate and infective in some man, the tension of that agony was over now. It survived not the something healing in the closeted interview with Captain Vere. Without movement, he lay as in a trance. That adolescent expression previously noted as his, taking on something akin to the look of a slumbering child in the cradle, when the warm hearthglow of the still chamber at night plays on the dimples that at whiles mysteriously form in the cheek, silently coming and going there. For now, and in the gyved one's trance, a serene, happy light, born of some wandering reminiscence or dream, would diffuse itself over his face, and then wane away only anew to return. Like,
I'm trying to find the poem it reminds me of, but there's such a loving cinematic quality to Melville's writing at times. I mean, he's and I noticed also that passage starts in the second person imperative. Behold, Billy Budd, and it's in first person for the first sentence until it switches. He's got such a toolkit, it switches from like imperative, look at Billy Budd, sort of symbolically, to like documentary. Like it's like you have a camera there and it's just panning across the deck, looking at the shrouds and the cannons and whatnot. And then the final thought, I think, is, what's your conclusion? Have these events changed his essential nature?
No.
Right. I think that's what I think the point of that passage is he's still exactly who he's always been. And
yet,
there's something beautiful.
The touch of death is on him.
Yeah, which is sad. It's tragic. Yeah. I mean, there is this kind of sacrificial lamb quality to the story, which might make one a little bit indignant on Billy Budd's behalf, which is sort of like, the British Navy has to sacrifice Billy Budd for the sake of rules. Well, the American Navy has to sacrifice him and give him up to the British for the sake of expediency. They're not going to, a merchantman is not going to fight the 74 gun Indomitable. Then, Captain Veer has to sacrifice him for the sake of expediency, as does the Navy, and then Melville has to sacrifice him for the sake of a good story.
Yeah, this is the number of times I thought about, Jesus, you got to make bad things happen to good people.
The blood sacrifice.
Seriously. And then, I mean, like the poet's toolkit, holy shit, some of these sentences, like, Jesus Christ, guns and carriages together with the long rammers and shorter lintstocks lodged in loops overhead, all these as customary were painted black. Those light consonants, lintstocks lodged in loops overhead, all, and then like were painted black. Like it just, he shifts the sounds. He shifts between hard sounds, soft sounds, short vowels, long vowels, like, and just you're right, the cinematic quality, like if we're writing the shot, interior, an incredibly dark gun bay where the lanterns actually only make it look darker.
Yeah.
There's a ghostly figure lying on the ground with a bemused, happy look on his face, even though you can kind of see the skeleton poking through the skin of his head.
Behold Billy Budd. Years ago, so I once gave a talk on how I thought that writers or radio producers or journalists of one medium should spend some time learning the tools of other media. And one of my demonstrations was I took a paragraph from White Jacket, which is a Herman Melville novel, where I detected similar poetic virtue, and I rendered it as stanzas. So I was just like, I'm going to read you this poem. Who here can guess the author? And nobody guessed that it wasn't actually a poem. Like everybody, I didn't try to suggest that it was a contemporary poem, because nowadays I think that meter, certainly rhyme, formal poetry has been largely, to a large degree, left behind in favor of the kind of whatever it is that drives contemporary poetry today, which I would say is a kind of like almost meaningless but just barely meaningful assemblage. That's plus maybe the rhythms of natural human speech. I don't know. I'm not a poet. You know more about this than I do. All I'm saying here is that nobody questioned that I had thrown a poem up. Right. And my point was, novelists should write poems. Radio producers should write poems. Poets should write novels. Poets should record audio stories. Poets should be photographers. Poets should be documentary filmmakers. You should know what it's like to sweep a camera across a black gun room and notice that the lights only make the room seem darker. And I would say that Melville is kind of like our first multimedia artist. You get it a little bit in this. If you read Moby Dick, there's like, here's a chapter that's just sea shanties. Here's a chapter that's written in dialogue. Here's a chapter written in the present tense.
That's just clam chowder.
Yes. Here's a chapter that's just how you render the fat of a whale. And like one of my favorite chapters, this was, the Newberry Library had a reading, and this was the one I picked. I was so delighted, is like an episode of Cheers. When Queequeg and Ishmael meet, and they go into the room together, and I believe Queequeg is sleeping under the bed, and Ishmael comes on top of the bed, and then Queequeg comes out and is like, "I'm gonna kill you." And Ishmael's like, "I'm your roommate." And then they're like, and then we were best friends. And it is this very first day of the sitcom when the characters get to know each other, but all rendered. I didn't do it justice. He is amazing. I want to read Taipei and White Jacket, which I've never read. I actually don't think I've ever made it all the way through Moby Dick, just because it does get a bit rough in the middle.
Ponderous.
Yeah.
At points. Yeah. You just reminded me of that Heinlein quote, the specialization is for insects quote. Do you know that one?
No, but that's great.
A human being should be able to change a diaper, plan an invasion, butcher a hog, con a ship, design a building, write a sonnet, balance accounts, build a wall, set a bone, comfort the dying, take orders, give orders, cooperate, act alone, solve equations, analyze a new problem, pitch manure, program a computer, cook a tasty meal, fight efficiently, die gallantly. Specialization is for insects.
Love it.
And that could be Melville, like the
Sail a ship.
yeah.
Yeah. And one thing I didn't realize is I always thought he was sort of unknown in his time, but like 2 of his novels had been hits, but then Moby Dick was not, and basically he had to go like work a day job. And when he wrote this, I think he was still publishing poems in magazines, but everybody had forgotten that he had written a hit novel because it had happened like 60 years prior or something. I mean, he was an old man when he wrote this book. Shall we do some trivia?
Let's do some trivia. You're up first. You're the host.
All right. Well, I was doing a little bit of research, and I learned that in 1988, there was a legal symposium at Washington and Lee University that took as its inspiration, it was 2 days of the law of Billy Budd, with legal scholars, judges, Richard Posner, maybe the most influential legal scholar of the 20th century, was there. There were many other scholars. There was a judge who at the time was in the New York Supreme Court.
Oh my God.
And I just got thinking, like, how often do American pop cultures like actually influence legal proceedings or legal scholarship? So Billy Budd is not the only piece of American popular culture to be influential on the law. My question for you is, which piece of, I'm going to call it modern American culture, and by modern I mean after 1990, because everything after 1990 is new, and everything before 1990 is old. So which modern piece of American culture has been cited over 24 times in actual legal publications? Is it A, My Cousin Vinny, starring Joe Pesci; B, the film A Time to Kill, based on the John Grisham novel; C, the film Legally Blonde, starring Reese Witherspoon; or D, the Inconstant Mood episode from the reboot of The Outer Limits in 1996, based on Larry Niven's short story, The Inconstant Mood?
Is the Inconstant Moon the one where our main character realizes that the sun has novaed, and
Yes.
and that he, like has to get as high up on the skyscraper because the world is just going to flood tomorrow? And
I haven't read it, but yes, it is the same.
It's great.
Yeah, you mentioned it in one of our very first tapings, which may have even started the Larry Niven fixation.
Maybe.
Yes, they made the Outer Limits was rebooted in the 90s, and they made an episode based on that. So it is a Larry Niven IP from the 90s.
Amazing. I'm going to go with My Cousin Vinny.
You're right.
Yes! Hooray!
Apparently,
why am I right?
Apparently, what legal scholars like about it is the impeaching of the expert witness is done very, very well, and kind of by the book. So Joe Pesci's character, I have not seen the movie, but there's an expert witness who's brought in basically to convict the boys of doing something, and the way that he dismantles the expert witness testimony is considered quite admirable, and has been cited at least 24 times as of this
That was
taping.
such a Melville sentence that you just said, was quite admirable and has been cited no fewer than 24 times in legitimate and...
It savors of competency and of the very qualities that the legal profession were based on when...
One might even sense that Job were here counting his many, it's just like, he is so, I like what you said about that modern or contemporary poetry is sort of assemblage. Assemblage never occurs in Melville. No. Even though there are a lot of words, he's somebody that I in particular should really pay attention to in terms of the economy of impact.
Yeah, and in this book, Melville is verbose. Or verbose. He is verbose. He uses verbiage.
Verbiose.
I do too. Maybe that's why I said it. He is verbose, but it is an economical book. It unlike Moby Dick, this book flies, and it's like it's really. It's kind of like 3-act play, right? Everybody gets a medal.
It's incredible. I definitely have been leaning on the homoerotic side of things, and
you're not alone.
Correct.
Scholarly.
Which other 19th century figure was an unrequited crush of Melville's? Was it Walt Whitman, another famously queer writer, Ralph Waldo Emerson, Nathaniel Hawthorne, or Lawrence Nividwarwick Veer?
Got it. Basically, you're saying who did Melville have a crush on? Who did not return the affection? Well, Whitman would have. Whitman was a bit of a slut. I think Hawthorne's
Whitman
too
got
old.
around.
So I think I'm going to have to go with Ralph Waldo Emerson because I think Hawthorne is just a little bit too old for Melville. That's my best guess.
Okay, well, I'm going to read you something in order to get us there. Melville dedicated Moby Dick to Hawthorne in token of my admiration for his genius. And Hawthorne's genius was not the only thing that Melville admired. Melville fell in love with the dashingly handsome older author the first time they met, and his forbidden passion drove him to create the symbol of impossible longing that now represents American literature to the rest of the world, the white whale. I don't quite agree with this particular author.
Yeah, it's like, is this just like somebody's blog or something like that? Like,
it's just like I was with you, and then I wasn't.
Yeah. I mean, it was plausible. Years ago, I worked for the show Backstory, and we did an episode about same-sex relationships in American history, and I went real deep into Walt Whitman. Actually interviewed his biographer, who is the one who really argued convincingly that Whitman didn't just have, homoerotic themes, but was in fact gay, had male lovers, and was in the closet. And because he was in the closet, you have to be closeted about something.
Right.
So there's long been this idea that homosexuality or the idea of a gay man didn't exist in the 19th century, even though everybody knows that men had sex with men and women had sex with women, but that this category of gay as something you could be instead of a man having sex with a man as something you do or could do didn't necessarily exist. But this guy Gary Schmidgall and others, I think, have largely put that to rest and basically said, well, they might not have had the same language for it we did today, but there was an understanding that some men were
only slept with men,
with men, or were more inclined to sleep with men, and that there were in fact places where you could be somewhat open about that, such as Paf's or Faf's, the tavern that Whitman frequented. But I did not know that Melville. I did not know that Melville was in the ranks of the closeted gay men of the 19th century. It's certainly plausible. It was not something I ever knew.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's one of those things that I've always just accepted as like, oh yeah, Melville was gay, but I can't remember like actually learning that at some point, because it is, I mean, the more you try to categorize Melville, however, in any particular way, the more your arguments just come apart at the seams in front of you, because like he's Shakespearean in his range of like feeling and emotion and his ability to communicate those things in just, you really, he's something of a black box. And which I think is one of his greatest achievements also. And it's probably the reason that he's drawn to, the ocean, just this massive ballast of meaning and emotion that it can't be elucidated, but it certainly can be felt. And I think that's what we get in Melville in particular. And this novel is it's a reduced and like concentrated, like you get like just a straight shot of Melville. It's the heroine. It's not the methadone.
Yeah. Well, and you could certainly read this as a love triangle. You could certainly also, you could read Billy Budd's popularity with the other sailors as sexual popularity, and that seems, but you also could read it not that way and it would still work. In the same way you could read The Talented Mr. Ripley as an unrequited romance between Tom Ripley and Dickie, or you could read it not that way and it would still work. You could read it as social jealousy, and I think one of the things that's great about this novel is that there's so much you can project on it. And I think it's what you're saying earlier is that there's so much that Melville alludes to but leaves to the imagination, such that for me, this is really a novel about the individual versus society and about sort of what we might call like right and wrong broadly and the expediency of moral rules. And the irony of that question, what it brings up is sort of to me is like, well, what's the point of having civilization and standing armies and standing navies and militaries and governments if it's not going to protect somebody like Billy Budd?
Correct. Yeah.
And I think that's what a lot of people were asking themselves in the 1920s too, after World War I, after we had hundreds of thousands of deaths and, we built tanks and things like that. That's why and that's also sort of like a question we should be asking ourselves now, and many of us are. And that's why it still feels so fresh to me. Yeah.
Yeah, this book is never going to go out of style. Dukes, how many more times will you read this book?
God, I don't know, at least twice, assuming I live long enough. Yeah. I think I read it one other time. Yeah, and it's also just reads so quickly. I read it twice this week. It flows very nice, and once you've immersed in the language, it's really quite pleasurable. Once you're, at least that was what I found. It took me a while, but once I got there, I got to the point where I started enjoying. How about you?
I want to teach this book. I want to somehow put a class together and be like, I'm going to read this at least 5 and, at least 5 more times before I die. And I'm not even going to put an upper limit on it because I've liked it so much.
Well, and this is also the ultimate lesson if you're a struggling writer and you have the sense, if you've submitted stories or novels to publishers and you have the sense that you're out of sync, and that the world doesn't seem to understand what you're getting at with your writing, you might be a bad writer, or you might be a Melville, like an absolute fucking genius who the world wasn't ready for in his own time.
Just stranded, in his own time. Yeah. Well, everybody, next up, one of my favorite films of all time, the 2001 film directed by Claire Denis named Beau Travail. It means good work. If you want to watch it, you can stream it from the Criterion Collection, and I also believe it's free on YouTube to just watch there. It is an amazing piece of work that we will watch and bring to you next time. And Upper Middlebrow is a small point production. Chris Bagg and Jesse Dukes are the captains, the masters at arms, and the foretopmen. Music is by Ben Pajak and Jesse Dukes. Design and website by me, Chris Bagg. We are supported by Jenny Grieve and Justin Reich. You can find us on Patreon, where there are a number of tiers at which you can show your support. There is a link in the show notes.
And a reminder, Chris and I are both writers and editors and can help you with your writing, podcasting, or editing project. You can see some of our portfolios and learn more at our respective websites, chrisbagg.com and jessedukes.com. Good night, everybody.
Thanks for listening, y'all.
Stay awake during the long watch.
Don't get pulled into any mutiny.